About like 60 pages. We're on chapter 34. I had this little pastry. Shout out to my sister. My sister Jessica brought this pastry. My sister Jasmine brought some sweet bread. Some sweet bread from like a little Mexican bakery. Could be Mexicans, a little Latino, some bakery. And my sister actually bought this from somewhere else. I think Trader Joe's. She got this. Shout out to both my sisters and my little bro. I have a lot of family. I don't want to mention just anybody, but I'm just one person. You know, you mention one person, they get mad. They get mad, but feel the certain way. But I got my first meal after my exercise, which I haven't exercised. It's been a while. I've been reading a lot. I got 30 pages. It's barely 9:30. I have 60 pages. It's barely 9:30, so I should be able to finish this book before the library opens. I'll be reading. Boom, 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 boom. The book is actually pretty good. It gets good, like, it gets better, you know? Huckleberry Finn's seen a bunch of shit. A bunch. It's pretty crazy how there's people that will go to town like that. The king and the duke should have started a business. They should have invested. They should have invested in their own circus. They should have really put on a show. You know what I mean? That was delicious, guys. Thank God for that. Grateful. Even though my mother and I don't get along that well, she looks out for me, man. Sure it's love. Sure it's part pity. But the other days she takes stuff out on me, but other than that, I love her. Gotta keep trudging along, because one day my subs will go up and I'll be able to make some sort of income from my YouTube channel. But on chapter 34, we cheer up Jim. We stopped talking and got to thinking by and by. Tom says, "Looky here, Huck. What fools we are to not think of it before. I bet I know where Jim is." "No, where?" "In that hut down by the ash hopper. Why, looky here. When we was at dinner, didn't you see a servant man going there with some victuals?" "Yes." "What do you think the victuals was for? For a dog?" "So did I." "Well, it wasn't for a dog." "Why?" "Because a part of it was watermelon." "So it was, I noticed it." "Well, it does beat all that I never thought about. A dog not eating watermelon. It shows how a body can see and don't see at the same time." Well, the servant unlocked the padlock when he went in, and he locked it again when he came out. He fetched Uncle a key about the time we got up from the table. Same key, I bet. Watermelon shows man, lock shows prisoner, and it ain't likely there's two prisoners on such a little plantation, and where the people's all so kind and good. Jim's a prisoner, all right. I'm glad we found it out. Detective fashion, I wouldn't give shucks for any other way. Now you work your mind and study out a plan to steal Jim, and I will study out one too, and we'll take the one we like the best. What a head for just a boy to have. If I had Tom Sawyer's head, I wouldn't trade it off to be a duke, nor mate of a steamboat, nor clown in a circus, nor nothing can think of. I went to thinking out a plan, but only just to be doing something. I know very well where the right plan was going to come from. Pretty soon Tom says, "Ready?" "Yes," I says. "All right, bring it out." My plan is this, I says. We can easily find out if it's Jim in there, then get up my canoe tomorrow night and fetch my raft over from the island. And the first dark night that comes, steal the key out of the old man britches after he goes to bed and shove off down the river on the raft with Jim, hiding daytimes and running nights the way me and Jim used to do before. Wouldn't that plan work? Work? Why, certainly it would work, like rats of fighting. But it's too blame simple. There ain't nothing to it. What's the good of a plan that ain't no more trouble than that? It's a mild as goose milk. Why, Huck, it wouldn't make no more talk than breaking into a soap factory. I never said nothing because I weren't expecting nothing different, but I know mighty well that whenever he got his plan ready, it wouldn't have none of them objections to it. And it didn't. He told me what it was, and I see in a minute it was worth 15 of mine for style and would make Jim just as free as mine would, and maybe get us all killed besides. So I was satisfied and said we would waltz in on it. I needn't tell what it was here because I know it wouldn't stay the way it was. I know he would be changing it around every which way as we went along and heaving in new bulliness wherever he got a chance, and that it was done, and that is what he done. But one thing was dead sure, and that was that Tom Sawyer was in earnest and was acutely going to help steal that slave out of slavery. That was the thing that was too many for me. Here was a boy that was respectful and well brung up and had a character to lose, and folks at home that had characters, and he was bright and not leather-headed, and knowing and not ignorant, and not mean but kind, and yet he was without any more pride or rightness or feeling than to stoop to this business and make himself ashamed and his family ashamed before everybody. I couldn't understand it no way at all. It was outrageous, and I knowed I ought to just shut up and tell him so, and so be his true friend and let him quit the thing right where he was and save himself. And I did start to tell him, but he shut me up and says, "Don't you reckon I know what I'm about? Don't I generally know what I'm about?" "Yes." Then I say I was going to help steal the slave. "Yes." "Well then." That's all he said, and that's all I said. It weren't no use to say anymore, because when he said he'd do a thing, he always done it, but I couldn't make out how he was willing to go into this thing, so I just let it go and never bothered no more about it. If he was bound to have it so, I couldn't help it. When we got home, the house was all dark and still, so we went on down to the hut by the ash hopper to examine it. We went through the yard so as to see what the hounds would do. They noticed and didn't make no more noise than the country dogs is always doing when anything comes by in the night. When we got to the cabin, we took a look at the front of the two sides, and on the side I weren't acquainted with, which was on the north side, we found a square window hole up tolerable high with just one stout board nailed across it. I says, "Here's the ticket. This hole's big enough for Jim to get through if we wrench off the board." Tom says, "It's as simple as tit-tat-toe, 3 in a row, and it's easy as plain hooky. I should hope we can find a way that's a little more complicated than that, Huck Finn." "Well then," I says, "how it'll do to saw him out the way I done before I was murdered that time?" "That's more like," he says. "It's real mysterious and troublesome and good," he says, "but I bet we can find a way that's twice as long. There ain't no hurry. Let's keep on looking around." Betwixt the hut and the fence on the backside was a lean-to that joined the hut at the eaves and was made out of plank. It was as long as the hut, but narrow, only about 6 foot wide. The door to it was at the south end and was padlocked. Tom, he went to the soap kettle and searched around and fetched back the iron thing they lift the lid with, so we took it and prized it out of one of the staples. The chain fell down and we opened the door and went in and shut it and struck a match, and see, the shed was only built against the cabin and had no connection with it. And there weren't no floor to the shed nor nothing in it but some old rusty played-out hoes and spades and picks and crippled plow. The match went out, and so did we. We shoved in the staple again, and the door was locked as good as ever. Tom was joyful. He says, "Now we're all right. We'll dig 'em out. It'll take about a week." Then we started for the house, and I went in the back door. You only have to pull a buckskin latch string. They don't fasten the doors, but that weren't romantical enough for Tom Sawyer. No way would it do him, but he must climb up the lightning rod. But after he got up halfway about 3 times and missed fire and fell every time, and the last time most busted his brains out, he thought he'd got to give it up. But after he was rested, he allowed he would give her one more turn for luck, and this time he made the trip. In the morning we was up at break of day and down the slave cabins to pet the dogs and make friends with the slave that fed Jim. If it was Jim that was being fed. The slave was just getting through the breakfast and starting for the fields, and Jim's servant was piling up a tin pan with bread and meat and things, and whilst the others was leaving, the key come from the house. The slave had a good-natured, chuckle-headed face, and his wool was all tied up in little bunches with thread. That was to keep witches off. He said the witches was pestering him awful these nights and making him see all kinds of strange things and hear all kinds of strange words and noises, and he didn't believe he was ever witched so long before in his life. He got so worked up and got so running on so about his troubles, he forgot all about what he'd been going to do. So Tom says, "What's the victuals for? Going to feed the dogs?" The slave kind of smiled around gradually over his face, like when you heave a brickbat in a mud puddle, and he says, "Yes, Mars said a dog. Curious dog, too. Do you want to go and look at him?" "Yes," I hunched Tom and whispers. "You going right here in the daybreak?" "That weren't the plan." "No, it weren't, but it's the plan now." So drat him, we went along, but I didn't like him much. When we got in, we couldn't hardly see anything. It was so dark, but Jim was there, sure enough, and could see us, and he sings out, "Why, Huck, and good land, ain't that Mr. Tom?" I just know how it would be. I just expected it. I didn't know nothing to do, and if I hadn't, I couldn't have done it, because that slave busted in and says, "Why, the gracious sakes, do he know you gentlemen?" We could see pretty well now. Tom, he looked at the slave, steady and kind of wondering, and says, "Does who know us?" "Why, this here runaway slave. I don't reckon he does, but we'll put that into your head." "We'll put it dar. Didn't he just this minute sing out like he know you?" Tom says in a puzzled up kind of way, "Well, that's mighty curious. Who sung out? When did he sing out? What did he sing out?" And turns to me perfectly calm and says, "Did you hear anybody sing out?" Of course there were nothing to be said but the one thing, so I says, "No, I ain't hear nobody say nothing." Then he turns to Jim and looks over like he never see him before and says, "Did you sing out?" "No, sir," says Jim. "I ain't said nothing, sir. Not a word." "No, sir, I ain't said a word." "Did you ever see us before?" "No, sir, not as I knows on." So Tom turns to the slave, which was looking wild and distressed, and says kind of severe, "What do you reckon's the matter with you anyway? What made you think somebody sung out?" "Oh, it's the dad blame witches, sir, and I wish I was dead, I do. They always at it, sir, and they do most kill me. They scares me so. Please, too, don't tell nobody about it, sir, or old Mars Silas, he'll scold me, 'cause he say they ain't no witches. I just wish to goodness he was here now." Then what would he say? I just bet he couldn't find no way to get around it this time, but it always just so people that sought, stay sought. They won't look into nothing and find it out for themselves. They won't look into nothing and find it out for themselves. And when you find it out and tell them about it, they don't believe you. Tom gave him a dime and said we wouldn't tell nobody, and told him to buy some more thread to tie up his wool with. And then looks at Jim and says, "I wonder if Uncle Silas is going to hang this slave. If I was to catch a slave that was ungrateful enough to run away, I wouldn't give him up. I'd hang him." And whilst the servant stepped to the door to look at the dime and bite it to see if it was good, he whispers to Jim and says, "Don't ever let on to know us. And if you hear any digging going on nights, it's us." Whilst he whispers, oh, so that's Huck. Oh, no, that's Tom Sawyer says, "Don't ever let on to know us. And if you hear any digging going on in the nights, it's us. We're going to set you free." Jim only had time to grab us by the hand and squeeze it. Then the servant come back, and we said we'd come again sometime if the slave wanted us to. And he said he would, more particularly if it was dark, because the witches went for him mostly in the dark, and it was good to have folks around then. So yeah, freaking Jim. So the servant of that land, he's in charge of going to feed Jim, who's tied up because he's a runaway slave, and those people are doing, I guess, following the law and just kind of getting their reward. And they caught Jim to send him back because there was a poster out for him for $200. So they're keeping him there. They're not gonna put him to work, he's not their servant, so they just have him there chained up. And as soon as he sees Tom and Huckleberry, he's like, "Oh, what's up, Huck? Is that Tom?" And then, but the servant that feeds him's like, how does he know you two?" That's when Tom's like, "I didn't hear nothing. Did you hear something?" He totally plays it dumb. Then he acts dumb, and then I was like, then he gives that servant some money to be quiet and stuff like that. So that was the end of chapter 34. Peace.